I'd like to start us off today by welcoming you to our first ever Bioinnovations lecture series. This lecture series is very specifically designed to highlight biotechnology and bioengineering, but with a focus on innovation, entrepreneurship, and transferring the technology into the marketplace. It's a very important series for us. We're very grateful today for the support of our sponsor, which is GE Healthcare. We're very happy today to start this series off with an absolutely fantastic speaker for you. So for today, our speaker is Dr. Charles Cooney, who's the Roger Haslam Professor of Chemical Engineering Emeritus, and the Faculty Director Emeritus for the Despondence Center for Technological Innovation. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Wu Yang, who's a longtime colleague of Dr. Cooney, to give a more personal introduction.
I know the speaker for many years as a colleague and as a friend, so obviously I could talk a long time about him, but I won't do that. It's a pleasure for me to tell you a little bit about him, though. I suppose you've Googled his name already, so I don't have to say too much. You will see from the Google that he's a very famous guy in many respects. Of course, for here, he's a very famous professor in biochemical engineering at MIT, and he knows about Walter because he spent part of his sabbatical here with me, and I did the reverse. I went to MIT. So between the two of us, we had a lot of students who are professors all over the world. So he was one of the architects of the summer courses for industry and fermentation technology, and the complementary one, which he generated, called downstream processing. And when I travel all over the world with Charlie to do a little bit of my consulting, I remember a lot of these guys come and said, "You remember I was sitting at the back, Wei Shu, for example. Remember, I was at the front, and then you told me to go sit at the back," because he's always there. Anyway, Charlie, it was also a Center for Research Center for Technology Innovation. This center, to be credited, spun off from the students over 30 companies. Now, he's not a unidimensional guy, as you could tell from the Google. He's a patron of the arts. He supports the ballet and the symphony in Boston. And he's a very great athletic guy. He goes everything from scuba diving, from Geelong to mountaineering, rock climbing, actually. And he got lots of stories about these things. I got to know Charlie because we were members of the American Chemical Society for many years. Although we are chemical engineers, as you know, we're also chemists in some ways. And we'd meet at least twice a year. One of the conference would be on the west side, the east side, and the east side. So we had a great time. These organizations, like, obviously, yes, I wasn't doing the right thing. You want me to start all over again?
No.
So the American Chemical Society, the American Institute of Chemical Engineers, which were members, and he has, as you probably know from Google, the prestigious awards from these organizations and others. He's a world traveler. As you probably know, we're very happy to catch him today. He's just flying last night from San Francisco. Then he'll go back and see his family in Boston for the weekend. And Monday he flies to Singapore, where he's also on the board there. So I wanted to say that we are very privileged to get you in your running, Charlie, to talk about a topic which is very timely for us, for our center. We would like to be happy to see if you share some of your experience and expertise, how we could get laboratory research into commercialization, and as you told me, to benefit society. So as our new Prime Minister might say, you are a person of the 2015 So with that, I pass over the rostrum to you, Tom.
Thank you, Mary. It's a, I have had the privilege of knowing and working with Murray for many, many years. I'll refrain from saying decades. And I always worry about the stories from some of our shared experiences, but I appreciate the kindness of your introduction. It's a real pleasure to be back at Waterloo. I've been here a number of times, and I did spend some time here as part of a sabbatical visiting professor. So I have very fond memories, even if I don't recognize the campus as it exists today, because it's very different than it was then. What I would like to do today is I do want to talk about really a couple of things. The main theme is accelerating technology from the university to commercialization. And in doing so, I'd like to talk about I will talk about the Despondence Center that we formed at MIT and some of the outcomes of that and what we have learned from an innovation center. And then I'll touch upon a number of examples that are of a more personal nature of companies that I've been involved with to try to illustrate some of the key issues. But I'd like to begin with one of my hobbies, and I'll introduce you to a couple of them during the course of the morning. This particular one is antique maps. I fell in love with the first map I bought about 25, 30 years ago, happened to be of the Caribbean. And I fell in love, but this map is one of my favorites. It's one of the earliest maps in my collection. It's from 1550. It's by the cartographer Munster. And it is the first printed map of Asia. Now, many of you have traveled and maybe even been born in parts of the region depicted on this map. And as you look at it, it's interesting to think about, well, where is my home, or where are the places that I have visited? And you, of course, recognize India here. Well, it sort of looks like that. South of India, we have the Maldives. Well, that's not where the Maldives are. The Maldives are really up here. Indonesia. Well, Indonesia has some large islands, but it really is 10,000 islands. And by the way, where's Australia? I thought the representation of Australia was actually pretty good, but it's not there. And what about Japan? There's sort of a notion that there's an archipelago of islands up in that region, but it's not there. So the reason I fell in love with these old manuscript maps is really two. They're quite beautiful. This is hand-colored. It's 500 years old. It's really quite thrilling to hold on to it and to have a chance to observe it up close and the like. But they're really quite beautiful. The other reason I'm passionate about these maps is they're wrong. Not because the cartographer wanted to make them wrong, but they represent the state of knowledge at the time. So that as we look at our own research, as we look at our research reports, our papers, as we read the work of others, we believe that what we read and what we print and what we publish is right, and in fact it is the best state of our knowledge at the time, but it is imprecise, it is incomplete, it is uncertain, and in many cases may prove to be wrong, even though it represents the best that we have. So when I look at these maps, it makes me humble about the research that I think about and that we all participate in, and it also makes me careful when I think about how we take it and move it forward. This led to an interest of mine in understanding the question of why Vasco da Gama was successful where Columbus failed. And this is the route taken by Vasco da Gama from Portugal, 1497, came south, went to the west in order to come east to get around what the Portuguese knew were currents and winds that were very difficult to get through. And then went around to India and came back a couple of years later. And Vasco da Gama was the first European explorer to find a sea route to India. And so the question that is of interest to me is why he was successful where Columbus failed. And I will confess that my favorite holiday is the second Monday of October, Columbus Day, because it's an opportunity to celebrate how failure was in fact converted to success. As an entrepreneur, he pivoted, as we say today. But when I look at the reasons why Vasco da Gama was successful, and so we're going back 500 years, why? He had leadership. Now, his leadership style was a little rough, but he did do the first open water voyage, 90 days open water, that had ever been done. Columbus had a mutiny after 30 days, and Vasco da Gama made it to land in 90. So leadership. Open innovation. Gama, based upon not Gama himself, but it really was Prince Henry the Navigator, who over a 50-year period of time brought together called a school, wasn't a physical school, but brought together many different innovations in establishing the Portuguese dominance of open water voyage, whereas the Spanish ships were not nearly as capable. It was convergence of technology, design, sales, cartography. Continuous learning. Through Prince Henry, they had learned how to sail not just along the west coast of Africa, but below the equator, where you lose the North Star. Business motivation, there was a clear economic driver, and the analytics, they had the best navigational aids at the time. So when you look at this list, how different is it than the list that you would put together today around innovation and entrepreneurship? And it's really identical. So the question becomes, what have we learned in the intervening 500 years? Well, a couple of general slides. One of the things that I've found fascinating is thinking about entrepreneurship and recognizing that entrepreneurship, leadership, statesmanship is a state of being. And as we know it, entrepreneurship, and as we think about it, is not a static thing. It's very action-oriented. So the term entrepreneuring is dynamic, and it evokes what we do when we try to promote entrepreneurship. We want the dynamics, we want the action. So when we think about it from an educational experience, there's a very profound difference between entrepreneurship and entrepreneuring. And now I will argue that entrepreneuring is really a profession. It can be taught. And like an entrepreneur as a professional, you can teach it as you can in engineering, law, medicine, and the like. So that's a fundamental belief that entrepreneurship can be taught, and it is an action term, and entrepreneuring is what we really want to be able to do. So when you think about entrepreneuring, then we have a bit of a dilemma where we often get into an argument as to, well, is this technology a solution looking for a problem, or is it a problem in search of a solution? And the answer is yes. And one of the characteristics, and the one that I'm particularly interested in, is the development of technology from the university, which is typically early stage, and how you translate that to a business, to commercialization. The typical entrepreneur recognizes that there's a problem, is typically agnostic to the technology that can be brought to bear, and Vasco da Gama was such an example. And he brought that together and developed a business around it. But from the university perspective, which is where I sit, I'm a 45-year academic at MIT. I'm not a businessman. I'm interested in the technology. And most of us in this room, that's true. So we have a solution that in fact is in search of a problem. And that's the heart of much of technology-based entrepreneurship. And what we're really trying to do, as this little diagram at the bottom suggests, is understand how to undergo this iteration between those two poles. But to me, they're very much the same thing, and they represent an iterative space. Now, because I'm giving this presentation in a university, particularly one that is steeped in education and a long history of education here in Canada, I wanted to spend just this one slide on what I think it takes to prepare a student or a postdoc or a faculty member or anybody else for that matter to be an entrepreneur. What are the attributes that you should bring in order to achieve this goal? And as you read through this list of entrepreneurial skills, these are the things that I have personally learned and I have seen as we work with our students and our postdocs and our faculty that are the important attributes as part of being prepared to take technology to its end result. So I think the list speaks for itself, and I won't dwell on any further. Now, this is an introduction to one of my other hobbies, and that's high-altitude mountaineering. But I use this slide to emphasize two things. The first, I use this slide to emphasize that innovation, entrepreneurship, entrepreneuring is a journey. It is a journey from which you begin and in which you proceed down a path with a lot of uncertainty. And that one of my mantras that I continue to remind myself is here in the right-hand corner, where that if you don't know where you're going and you don't have a means of measuring where you are, then you won't know that you've arrived. So we really need to begin with a vision of where we want to go. That's the starting point, even though we're not there. And then we need to understand how are we going to measure progress along that path, recognizing that those measurements and even the vision may change with time, but that's where we want to go. So for me, as a technologist, I see ideas coming from, it doesn't matter whether it's my lab or somebody else's, it's capturing that vision. And how do we capture the vision of where you want to go? And I'll explain to you the process that we use in just a moment. This is another slide that I use in order to emphasize that that journey has uncertainty and has risk. And that's what you want to embrace. I took this picture standing down here on this rock ledge at about 19,000 feet, and the vision is to get up to 23,000 feet. And the path has some uncertainty associated with it. And I did this with a team. There were 6 of us, my son, myself, two guides, and 2 climbing Sherpas. Of the 6 of us, including the Nepalese Sherpas who were with us, none of us had been to that summit before. So it's not the first time that it's been there, people have been there, but for the 6 of us, it was a novel route. So we needed to understand where we put our feet. If you're a rock climber, this is spectacular granite along the Knife Edge Ridge. It is, for rock climbing, it's terrific. If you're a nice climber, there's some really interesting spots up through here. And then this route is just simply a glacier, albeit a little steep. So about 2002, and we had a donor at MIT give MIT $20 million with a very simple charter, and that was I would like to see you create a center that will help accelerate emerging technologies move towards commercialization. That was the simple mission. And this was Desh and Deshpande, who, by the way, was not an MIT grad, but had been very successful, he and his wife, in the Boston community, and wanted to stimulate, particularly for younger people, this translation of early stage technologies to impact. And that was the simple mission. And I was privileged and honored to be asked to create that center. And I agreed to do it, having no idea what I would do. But I thought it seemed like a cool idea, and I had been involved in startup of a number of companies and involved in industry for some time. So I figured we could figure out what to do. And this is one of two slides that if you don't remember anything else from what I say this morning, this one is important. And all you have to remember from this slide are three words: select, direct, and connect. Because that's the paradigm that evolved out of the work we did in the center. Select, direct, connect. Ideas bubble out of the university from basic research. A few of those ideas emerge with the vision that if it's successful, maybe we can commercialize it. It will have impact. You now need a process for selection. And what we do is use a process of combination peer, academic, and business review. I'll talk a little bit more about it in just a moment. Direct is that once we select an idea, what does a typical faculty member know about markets and customers? Well, I'll speak for the MIT faculty, and basically it's very little. So what we do is when we make an award, we assign a mentor, a catalyst, who does understand markets and can help identify customers, such that the research becomes focused on translation of the concept to a specific product or service. And these are translational awards that we're making. We don't leave that to chance. And third is that we need to direct the investigators to customers and to venture financing. And then, and only then, do we now see successful creation of a new company and company growth. So this is the very simple model of what we do. So now the question becomes, what are the next steps? I'll let you guess whose feet they are that are there. So what we did was to put together a center called the Despondence Center. And like any decent academic center, we have money that we can give away. And like any university, faculty members are very good at receiving and spending money. But the question is, how do we get them to spend it with capital efficiency and on something that will help de-risk an idea as it moves towards some commercialization, even though we don't have the foggiest idea in the beginning what that commercialization may be. We simply have faith that if it was successful, it might have commercial impact. So we have two types of grants. The first grant is called a ignition grant, in which we look at a lot of ideas, and we will give a faculty member a $50,000 grant, less than one full-time equivalent of support, to establish proof of concept. And I fully am aware that most of those grants are going to fail. I just don't know which ones. But I expect that most of them will fail, and I don't mind failing with $50,000, but I don't want to fail with the innovation grants that are $250,000. So I use those small grants to take risk. And I want to take risk because I don't want a project where it's obvious it's going to create a company in a specific space. That's going to happen anyway. I want to take risk where you need some translational input. These are translational grants based upon the translational medicine model. And then with the innovation grants, if they're successful, that's where you cross the barrier to create a new company and spin it out, and you can have some commercial impact. And this is how we apply the select, direct, connect model. And what we want to do is have this play out in a 2 to 3 year period. Ignition grants are 1 year, innovation grants are 1 year. We will give a no-cost extension, highly disciplined. We will not renew these grants. This is not basic research. And if you don't get to the point where a company is going to spin out, we're not going to continue to fund it. We're going to go and find other new ideas. And more often than not, ideas do not spin out after their 2 years. They need a further incubation. But the translational money that we provide, and we don't fund companies, we only fund research projects on campus. And after a little bit of time, those projects will mature and you will see them spin out. So it doesn't happen instantaneously. It happens invariably slower than we would like to think. So our role at the university in the Innovation Center, in the Despondence Center, is really to bridge this gap between academic research. Why do we do academic research? We want to generate knowledge and we want to train students. That's our business. That's why we're in universities. And I don't want to change that. My whole life has been spent doing that. I don't want to change it. But if we can bridge the gap for those occasional ideas that it will have commercial impact, that's cool. Because the ultimate objective is to enhance the impact of research. Simple as that. And what we put in place to do that is this grant program that I talked about, the Catalyst program, which are mentors. These mentors are business people. And like a catalyst, they're meant to accelerate the reaction without entering into it. The mentors have no rights to any company if it's formed. If they do decide to get involved in a company that's formed, they're no longer catalysts. We bring in a new catalyst and they go to the other side of the table. And that works quite well. And we have also, we did not start with an educational objective, but the students and the postdocs said, you're depriving us in our educational experience by not explaining how you take technology into the marketplace. The business school does a really good job of telling us how to write business plans and the theory of management and entrepreneurial finance, but how do we take technology to a market? So we created I-teams in collaboration with the Sloan School of Business, of Management. And in the classroom, we take the projects that we support in the Despondence Center, and we bring together 50% engineers and scientists and 50% management students. And we have them focus on real projects and in real time develop a go-to-market strategy, not a business plan. Not a business plan. Simply go-to-market strategy. Because if you can do that, the business plan falls out of it. And that's not, academics in engineering and science should not be writing business plans. But that's my own personal bias. And that's how we bridge the gap. It's as simple as that. Let me give you an example. This is one of our early projects. It came out of a colleague of mine, Doug Hart. Doug is a mechanical engineer, very accomplished fluid dynamist. And his specialty is turbulent flow. And he wanted to visualize the turbulence. So he came up with this really cool idea where the idea was to take this device, which could then be put between the lens and the body of any digital camera, still or motion, and convert that image to a 3D format. And he did this because he wanted to enhance his research. As simple as that. And he applied for one of our innovation grants because he thought it might be useful for something else. And his original proposal was for facial recognition, which when we funded the project, we thought that was not a very attractive market, but we really liked the technology. So the vision was, no pun intended, the vision was that if successful, this could do a number of different things. Now, often in an audience like this, I'll do a little quiz at this point, and I'll go around the room and I'll ask each people, well, what would you do with it if you had it? And I'm not going to do that, But make a mental note, okay? You have this device, goes between the lens of a camera and the body of any digital camera, and you get a 3D image, high resolution. What would you do with it? Now, there's no doubt in my mind, if I go around 50, 60 people, I'm going to get at least 25, 30 answers, and I'm going to get several answers that I never thought about before or haven't heard about before. I'm going to get some really new things. So here's an example of what you need to do. You fund the translational research because you have some vision that if it was successful, it could be commercially attractive. But in fact, what is that market? Because understanding the market will influence the experiments you do in the lab. So that's part of the iteration that I talked about before. So what are you going to use it for? What is the market and who is the customer? Well, whoops. I forgot the answer slide, so I'll tell you what the answer is. I think when I was editing, I hit the delete a little too quickly. The first market is in the dental market for caps and crowns. That rather than shove in a piece of clay, making a mold that is pretty imprecise and uncomfortable, you take out the clay, ship it off to some lab, they make a cap or a crown, and it comes back, and the dentist tries to put it in your mouth, and it doesn't quite fit. So he sculpts it down, and eventually he gets it to fit. Imagine if you had a high-resolution 3D image, you could now combine it with some other technology and do real-time manufacturing of that cap and crown, and it'll fit. And it was a convergence of technology with some other technologies, and that was the initial market. And within a couple of years, the company sold for about $100 million to 3M. That same investigator came back to us again with another proposal on 3D imaging. But in this one, he wanted to do 3D imaging of an interior space. And being a user of hearing aids, I was a little biased about this application. I thought this is a cool idea. And of course, my vision was that it would make a better hearing aid. But ultimately, and we funded the project. It's a much more difficult project to do 3D images of an interior space than an external space. But we funded the project, led to a spin out, and the killer app, if you will, is really high-end earphones for music. And so it's a different place, and therefore you develop the technology somewhat differently. So how have we done in the center? I feel pretty good. We funded about 120 projects out of about 650, 700 proposals. This is why you need to have a tenured faculty member as the center director, because you say a lot of no's. But anyway, I learned to say no with a smile on my face. And so we identified 120 projects, committed about $14 million. We've now had 33 startups that have emerged out of those projects. And those startups have gone on to raise over $600 million in venture financing. So there's a lot of leverage. And then, unfortunately, I could not manage the center as you would a venture capital fund, in which I could get some of the carry. And because I was spending MIT money that came from this gift and other sources of money. I could not fund companies, and once the companies formed, I can't fund that investigator, because that company typically has licensing from MIT, and I can't use MIT money to fund something that MIT would benefit from. So there are many issues in there. So I can't get the carry. But we have benefited from some of these, not as much as I would like, but we have benefited from some of them. 75% of those projects were failures. And some people say, well, how can you spend this money, MIT money, knowing that most of it's not going to work? I just don't know which one isn't going to work. And I feel pretty good about this ratio of 25% or so of companies spinning. And the reason they didn't work, it was too early. Technology didn't work. There wasn't a market. But the success rate is 100% if I consider that every person that we funded and everybody in their laboratory, which is now thousands, have benefited by this entrepreneurial experience. And that's where the impact on the university happens. And then it turns out that a lot of these projects, even though they may not have worked, have led to faculty getting follow-on grants from someplace else. So the leverage back to the institute is quite substantial, and it builds a community. Now, I put this slide in particular. We did a 10-year retrospective analysis a few years ago on the center to see what lessons we had learned, and also to understand the population of individuals who had participated. Not all MIT faculty, not all MIT students are entrepreneurial in terms of wanting to be connected to taking technology out of the institute. Fortunately, that would not be a very pretty picture. But this represents a snapshot. 75% of our applicants of that pool of 700-ish projects, 75% of those come from School of Engineering. Mechanical engineering, material science, chemie, and EECS dominate that pool. Now, we only see a fraction of the entrepreneurial activity at MIT because we're funding translational research. And if a faculty member doesn't need that kind of support, they have their own mechanisms and ways of spinning companies out. So this is not a gate. This is meant to be an opportunity to tease out of all that research going on at MIT, those ideas that might make a difference and have impact. The distribution by rank was kind of interesting to us. We were a little concerned that we would see much interest by untenured assistant professors, because an assistant professor has got their head down and their job is to get promoted in tenure, not to go spinning, be diverted and go off to startup companies. But because of the nature of these grants, and this is something we learned in retrospect, because of these innovation grants from the Despondence Center, they look identical to any other grant that you would get around MIT. The terms and conditions are no different. And that was by design. I didn't want to change the culture. I just wanted to capture things coming from the culture. And as a consequence, assistant professors could get these grants, use them to support their students and publish, and do all the things that you're supposed to do to support your tenure. And by the way, also enhance the impact of your research because it might have some commercial impact, but without diluting your primary responsibilities to the institution, not to mention your family. So these kind of grants had a surprising impact on the early development of faculty. Another surprise was the distribution by gender. And the number of women faculty in the School of Engineering is 14%, yet of our applicants, 10% applied. So don't know why. That's just an observation. Now, a second slide that I would suggest that you remember, or the key words from it, is shown here. Because one of the things I did as I've reflected back over the center is I say, well, we've been successful, and I feel pretty good about that. And that success comes out of the work of a lot of people. I just happen to be in the fortunate role of the faculty director. And what have I learned? that underscores this. And very simply, these 6 principles. One is that ideas emerge from scientific knowledge. That's basic research. Second, that in order for those ideas to be translated, there has to be a knowledge of what the problem is. You need to fund it, and that's called translational research. There needs to be an internal ecosystem within the institution that supports entrepreneurial type of behavior. Entrepreneurial behavior. There has to be an external ecosystem outside of the institution that can absorb it, and there have to be people, entrepreneurs, who can step up to the plate. And they typically are not faculty. Rarely does a faculty member leave the institution to go out and start the company, or certainly not beyond a leave of absence or a sabbatical. And even that is unusual. They stay involved, but their goal, fortunately, and mission is unchanged. So when I make the point to speak about, again, about risk, because I think it's important that as you embark on this kind of a journey of innovation and entrepreneurship, you recognize that there's risk. Now, this is a picture that I took of my son. And for those of you that are parents, and you think about this, the distance from my son's feet to the ground is about 4,000 feet. And the ground is not soft grass, it's granite. So the impact of a fall is pretty clear. And it causes you to rethink risk. Many people ask me, well, why did you put your son out there in front of you? I mean, he's smarter than I am. He's more skilled, and he's definitely stronger. And the question becomes, how do we actually mitigate that risk? Because we can't change the impact. If you fall, and the impact is clear. So the only thing we can do in the risk equation is to mitigate the probability. And you will notice that he has 2 ropes independently fixed to the top of the wall that we were climbing. It's a 100-foot vertical climb. It's a little tough because the air is kind of thin. And second, there's another rope that links to me. Oh, that doesn't do you any good, except that I'm linked to the rock. So if he falls, he'll fall 10, 15 feet, and it will hurt. But you're not going to fall beyond that. So you manage the probability of that risk. And that's what we do when we try to fund these translational projects, trying to keep them within the internal ecosystem and allow them to grow and divide and grow and divide. That's clearly the biochemical engineering in me. Allow them to grow and develop within a safe environment as you can. You try to manage that probability. So in the last piece of what I want to say, these are the 4 pillars of innovation. And one of the things I did that I thought about this problem of what I call it the value cycle. It has been quoted many, many times over and over again that economic growth at the macro level comes from technological innovation. And this comes out of the economics literature. So I had heard this again and again, and I went back and I read the early economics literature. I struggled. It was not particularly easy. But I finally understood the assumptions on which economists made this conclusion, drew this conclusion. So then I put together what we had been doing and what I had learned into what I call a value cycle. It's a systems dynamics diagram, but to me it represents what has to happen to take an idea from a university and translate it to economic growth at the macro level. So basic research, this is us. Here we are in the university, largely funded by government research for the purpose of knowledge and education. There are a few ideas that emerge that, when linked to a problem, generate what we call applied research. That applied research, if successful, leads to a design. There's a lot of invention and intellectual property that particularly happens here. If the design makes sense, if the product makes sense, you need to have a process to manufacture it. You need to scale it, develop a supply chain, deliver it to the customer. If the customer likes it, there's a reinforcing feedback loop for more manufacturing. If the customer likes it, there's impact. There's another reinforcing loop that gives you more customers. And if the impact is real, it generates profits, some of which goes back into research, but that's where economic growth comes from. This is not a perpetual motion machine, but rather requires continual investment from the government. If you apply it to biotech innovation by simply replacing a few of the terms to preclinical development, process design is really clinical trial and regulatory approval. The customer is the patient, the impact is health, but the diagram is fundamentally continues to be the same. So I found this as a useful way to think about what has to happen as you take ideas and build them out in order to have impact. It's translation of research to impact. That's what we care about. And recognizing that you can enter this value cycle in multiple places, that you capture maximum value from new science, ultimately, and that creation of impact, it is not a perpetual motion machine, but rather that new science requires a continual investment. Now, in this slide, I use it to emphasize one word, and that's goal. What are we trying to do? So as I stand here on Ama de Blanc, I'm looking at my feet. Why am I looking at my feet? Why am I not looking ahead as to where I'm going? What's my goal? Why am I, I'm not going to ask you why I'm standing there in the first place. But what is my goal while I'm standing there?
Fall down the cliff.
That I don't want to fall down. That's absolutely true. It's not my goal, but it's absolutely true. I don't want to fall down. You want to put your foot in the right spot, because if you miss, the downside's not very pretty. I have time. This is 23,000 feet, 5 breaths per step. You take 2 or 3 steps, and you can't move until you suck in 15 or 20 times to get enough oxygen to take the next couple of steps. But my goal is to get back down safely. We make decisions based on our goal. And if you don't have clarity of that goal, you make the wrong decision. If the goal is to summit, then you start making decisions to summit, independent of things like the weather or what's happening to other people that you're climbing with. So you really need to have clarity. So let me go back to that value cycle and very quickly go through a couple of scenarios. The Deshpande Center that we created, it operates in this sphere of translational research, where we try to identify these ideas and get them to the point of a proof of concept. Remove technical as well as market uncertainty. Many times within universities, you have centers. We have a center for continuous manufacturing. That center focuses on design and manufacturing problems. So it's an academic center. Out of that center, we spun a company. I'll talk about it again in just a moment. But you can see that you can enter this in a number of different ways. And very quickly talking about 3 examples from a personal perspective, Genentech, Genzyme, and Biocon. I was fortunate to be involved in early days of all 3. Genentech, how did it get started? It got started as a new venture around basic research, recombinant DNA technology that could be a platform. And it couldn't grow until it began to then use its resources as a company to put together all these other components. But its humble beginnings was really around research. Genzyme, on the other hand, was a very different company. When we put Genzyme together, we did so we had 2 manufacturing assets, companies that we bought in the UK, one in chemical manufacturing, one in biological manufacturing, a research project that was to make an enzyme that could be used for enzyme replacement therapy. We had no basic research. That didn't exist at the founding of Genzyme. So it fits into the value cycle. It started in a very different way, recognizing that to be successful, and I had the privilege of being on the board of the company till we sold it to Sanofi for $20 billion a couple of years ago, that we had to bring all those other pieces in. Biocon, an Indian company that Ravi and I had the privilege of serving on as co-directors for many years, formed in a very different manner. It had been an enzyme company. It had been a company that was steeped in manufacturing. It did not have basic research. It didn't have clinical and product development except for the enzyme business. So what happened as it grew, it needed to develop that capabilities and then continue to expand and bring them all together. So the route that one can have in entrepreneurial growth is often complex. Now, these are 4 companies that I'm involved with. Intelligent is a company that is a software company that spun out of one of my PhD students' thesis for process simulation. Early days of biotech and current methods of doing process simulation didn't exist. The Mac had recently been invented. That tells you how old that was. And it was a combination of new technology embodied in the Macintosh computer for graphic representation that allowed us to combine it with models for process simulation. And it is the dominant process simulator for biological applications for manufacturing today. Mitra Biotech was a company we put together about 4 or 5 years ago, and of some diverse technologies that had in a number of places. And the purpose, the mission of the company was to fill a void in cancer diagnostics, not diagnosing the cancer, but identifying how a patient's cells would individually respond to alternative chemotherapies. From when we put it together to now, it's evolved substantially. We use a completely different technology that we began with, but the mission has been invariant and has now been applied to thousands of patients. Continuous is a small company we spun out of our research center for continuous manufacturing. And it's developing a process platform to implement continuous manufacturing for pharmaceuticals. And Greenlight Bioscience, we founded based on work of a former student of mine, who happens to be a faculty member at Stanford, of using cell-free synthesis as an alternative way of making chemicals biologically rather than using growing cells. So one can take diverse concepts and you need to converge them to solve very specific problems. So let me close with this slide that we happen to be successful in summiting Ama Dablam. It's 10 miles directly south of Everest. And you can see Everest here in the background. We had an unimpeded view of the South Col of Everest from the summit. But I use it, and it was a beautiful sunny day. I use it with this closing comment, that even if you're successful in reaching the intermediate goal, you need to recognize that it's an intermediate goal. Once you reach the summit, you're only 25% into your journey, because 75% of the accidents happen on the way down. So even once you have launched your venture, the real hard work is yet to come. But I remain an optimist about entrepreneuring and accelerating fascinating technology, particularly from an institution of the quality of this one. And you can just see the vibrancy as you drive around the neighborhood, as you talk to people, and see the kind of things that are happening. So I look forward to following the success of entrepreneuring at Waterloo. Thank you.
We have a specific procedure on this where we need to get a microphone to you. That's partly so you can be heard, but also so you can get put on the video. So, who would like to start off? Do you have some questions for Dr.
So, just out of curiosity, does the Deshpande Center fund Canadian researchers ever?
Does it fund
Canadian researchers ever?
Only if they happen to be faculty members at MIT.
Yes, you mentioned that 75% of organizations that are within the incubator fail, and that's okay. The technology lawyer in Vancouver, a lot of the clients we see that are, hit the summit, now they're working on the next 75%, are on their second or third or fourth venture right there. So I'm curious as to what extent you track, you measure, or you even have programs to encourage those that this is not their first attempt, this is their second or third or fourth. How do you see that initial 75%, which was failure, was actually good for them, and you're now seeing them come back? Do you measure that?
Yeah, I like that. I like that question very much, because embedded in your question is the suggestion that failure is not a bad thing. You've learned something, and you come back again, and you're now doing something based upon your prior knowledge, which I believe strongly in. Many of our applicants, and I don't have a number at the tip of my tongue, but many of our applicants have come back to us a second, a third time, even when we have not accepted the project or the project may not have been successful. We like that. That is a positive, seen as a very positive attribute in subsequent applications, because there's so much learning. I mean, we all come into the room, to the table with a disability. Every one of us comes to this table with a disability, and that disability is our prior experience. We are constrained by what we know, and the more experience we have, the better you can approach and take effective strategies to a successful solution.
Yeah, you just covered maybe a little bit of this, but I'm interested in the sort of non-faculty expertise that you're bringing in particular with the mentorship, the entrepreneurs that are then sort of taking these things up once the proof of concept is there, and the, I guess, teams that are doing problem identification. How do you bring those teams together around particular technologies or issue areas or sort of research domains? And where are those people coming from?
Wow. First, it's important to recognize that MIT, like University of Waterloo, is a very large ecosystem and has many different components to it. And you, like we, are continuing to grow and evolve. So there are many different parts of MIT that come together and make it work there pretty well. From the Despondence Center point of view, we typically don't get engaged with teams of people looking at how to solve a problem. because our sweet spot is identifying early stage technology that has potential to spin out if you can find the right problem. So we're going the other way. Those groups that are doing entrepreneurship around problem solving, they're going to do perfectly fine without what we do. Though that kind of an activity doesn't need what we do. It needs what other people at the Institute do, but not us. And then the mentors, we use people who have entrepreneurial experience, or some of them are venture capitalists, some of them entrepreneurs, some of them from big companies. And they like to be around MIT, they like to be around students, they're willing to volunteer some of their time to be part of an interesting community without any a priori expectation of an outcome.
So for Canadian startups with researchers that might be bootstrapping and developing their technology, would you have any recommendations for how to kind of broach the Boston ecosystem and try and reach some of that capital?
I don't. I have had the privilege of traveling extensively through Canada for NSERC in the past, and I've gotten to know the country quite well. And I think I've probably been to all the major universities, and I've had many close relationships with colleagues and friends. But I really don't understand necessarily. I don't particularly understand the nuance of this environment. So it would be hard for me to make a recommendation, except to say that it's how you bring together all the different resources, how you create the teams, and how you develop the synergies. The interesting problems occur at interfaces, and are not siloed and are not disciplinary, and so you need to bring together with a lot of people, each with their own disabilities, that are all different.
And this will be our last question.
Okay. In evaluating early stage technology proposals for commercialization funding, I've often noticed certain blind spots that tend to recur in these proposals. One that I'll mention is cost. That the proponents of the proposal haven't even made a serious attempt to estimate what their technology would cost in implementation, and whether they're a factor of 5 or an order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude away from what would be required to get into this particular marketplace. I'm wondering, what sort of blind spots do you see recurring, and how do you try to get around them?
I have to ask the question, who in this room has ever been successful at estimating what the cost and time would be for the realization of a technology? You'll notice that my hands are nowhere near up in the air. But let me interpret your question in a broader sense, and that is, how do you deal with the blind spots? We try to deal with it in an iterative way. So our process in the Deshpande Center, we do a broad call for proposals. We ask for a 3-page proposal, and for somebody to articulate their ideas. We then use a panel review of academics and business people to pick those proposals that we think, if successful, might be interesting. And then we ask typically about a third of the proposals will fall into that category. Only then do we ask the investigator for a full proposal. And when we ask them for a full proposal, we do 2 things. One, we give them all the feedback from the discussion around the table, because we want them to be successful. So we try to give them as much insight into things that they missed or might not have thought about it in the preliminary proposal. And that's when we assign the catalyst, that business mentor, to help them write their full proposal. Full proposal comes in, and then we do a peer technical review, traditional, send it out, to experts. And then we asked the team to come and give a presentation to yet a different panel, different set of ears, again, academics and business people. And then we have a chance to ask them a lot of questions. We also see the team interaction, and that's important. That's a very important quality. So we try to front-end load the process by giving as much feedback from all different directions to the investigators. And then if we do fund the project, they have a catalyst, we meet with them often. We don't direct the research, that's their responsibility. We make sure we take them by the hand and sit them down with the tech transfer office, and we develop an IP strategy right from the get-go. So we have those interventions. So we're trying to deal with identifying the blind spots in real time, because they're going to happen. It's a proactive process.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have for questions today. I'd like to say a very sincere thank you to Dr. Cooney for the time he spent with us today. I think it stimulated a lot of ideas on a topic that we're all very, very interested in. Being reminded, time to do my job here. This is a very small token of our appreciation.
Oh, thanks.
It doesn't even really, but hopefully it leaves you with some good memories of your visit to Waterloo.
Thank you very much.
Great.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you all.